Okay, so this program is made possible through federal funds provided by the Institute of Museum and Library Services as administered by the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. My name is Vicki Turcott. I'm the Assistant Director for Support Services here at the library. Please welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see you all. Tonight's program is Embrace Your Bonus Years. Our presenter, Dorian Mintzer, PhD, MSW, is a retirement coach, consultant, and popular speaker. She combines her personal and professional experiences as a therapist, coach, and teacher with expertise in adult development, life planning, and positive psychology as she works to help people navigate the second half of life. Please welcome Dorian Mintzer.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here and to be part of your series on the go with healthy senior living. My passion really is to help people think about this next stage of life with a paradigm shift. And you may already be thinking some about this, but I'm gonna, hopefully invite you to open yourself up to different ways of thinking about it and different ways of thinking about empowering yourself, because I really do feel that we have this gift of longevity right now. We have these bonus years, and it would be a shame to not use them. So it's an opportunity to really recognize that we can have some control, not total control, but some control over how we live our life, so that hopefully that we don't reach the end of our life with regrets. So I know that, we're coming out of this really hard year with the pandemic. And so some of what I'm saying has been modified somewhat in terms of the isolation and all. And I think from my perspective, it's made it even more important to think about what are the parts we can control in our life. Many of you may have or may not have heard about the concept of longevity revolution. Basically, the notion is that we're living longer because of a lot of medical advances. Now, again, this is a little different now with COVID because we've had so many, deaths this past year. But people are, in general, living longer past the more traditional retirement age, which is like 62 or 65. So in general, when people reach 62 or 65, it's become clear that the expectation now is that people have 20 to 30 or more years ahead. In my parents' generation, it used to be more the exception, but now it's more the expectation with the medical science. And it doesn't mean living without terminal illness, perhaps, without chronic illnesses, with a variety of things. But even with all of that, there are opportunities to design our life and we want to say reinvent ourselves or redeploy ourselves in a sense, so we can have a really fulfilling life. The old paradigm, I just sort of want to mention the old paradigm of aging, and some of you may still subscribe to it because I think there is a lot of ageism in our society and a lot of fears about getting older. And it's very easy for those of us as we get older to internalize it. And so there can be this sense of, watch out, I don't want to go there. However, it's a gift. If we're lucky enough to keep living, it's important to be able to think about how we want to live so we can live in the best way that's possible for us. So the old paradigm was, the first stage of life is learning, educating, maybe having a family, maybe not, maybe choosing to be alone, working, with the idea that you sort of climb the ladder of success and, 62, 65 in the more traditional retirement age. The old notion was, and I love this image that a friend of mine who's a role model, Bill Sadler, who's a sociologist, uses. He says, the old notion is you get to the top of your pinnacle, the top of the ladder, and you put us on your seatbelt, you reach for the throttle, and it's all downhill, and you just pray for a safe landing, with maybe a sense that there's this expiration date on your forehead. That has changed now. And now with the bonus years, if you think about it, just picture kind of a plateau with a lot of hills and valleys. And those are the bonus years. It's not all flat, it's not all kind of linear, a lot of ups and downs, but we have the potential of these years if we choose to take some risks and choose to think about how we want to use that time. So the concept of the longevity revolution is with us. The other thing that's been happening is that really the concept of retirement has been changing. And people really sort of don't necessarily feel that it's a good word anymore, but we still use it. Because it used to be, when life was shorter, people worked hard and long hours and oftentimes on their feet and demanding jobs. And so by the time they were 62 or 65, when the lifespan was more like, late 60s, maybe early 70s, the idea was you retire, you have a time of leisure, and then you die. Now, retirement really isn't a destination so much anymore. If you think about it, it's more now a transition or a journey. And many people no longer, it doesn't mean that you're retiring from life when you retire from work. And many people decide, sometimes at the traditional retirement age or longer, later, but many people decide they don't want to work, or they may want to decide, or they may need to keep working, but they want to perhaps work in a different way. And so part of my focus is going to be on, how people kind of make these decisions. Some people are forced into retirement when they don't even want to retire because of downsizing and mergers. And certainly this last year, many people may have been forced into an early retirement and they still want to work. And working doesn't necessarily have to be for pay, although it can be, and for some people it needs to be. But I think it's important to recognize that there really are a lot of options. Another role model, a friend of mine, a dear, dear friend, Jan Hively, who is 89 years old and has kind of reinvented herself many times. Her mantra is meaningful work, paid or unpaid, through our last breath. And I must say, I rather like that mantra, so I've sort of made it my own. But that's not to say there can't be time of leisure, and meaningful work, can be defined in so many different ways. But the point that I really want to get across is that we have these bonus years, and it would be a shame to not let yourself try to maximize them as best you can, and to recognize that we have a chance to design this next stage of life rather than just doing it by default. The default position more is reacting to those around us or deciding we don't have choices. The more design is being able to think about, what do I want to do? So what I think I find helpful is to think about what was it or what is it? And again, I don't know in the group that we have here, how many of you are retired, how many of you are thinking about retiring, of those of you maybe who aren't working, are you not working at all? Are you working in different ways? I just don't know. So I'm going to try to speak to all those different possibilities, but hopefully during the question and answer, you'll be able to ask questions and I'll do my best at responding to them. But if you think about it, work and active parenting are somewhat parallel in the sense that we have a reason to get up in the morning. Generally, there's a sense of community that we're part of. Generally, there's some sense of self-esteem. We have usually connection, engagement, purpose and meaning, meaningful relationships, a sense of accomplishment, all of these things that positive psychology really speak to as being so important in life. In fact, well-being is thought of as kind of a three-legged stool where there's connection, engagement, and purpose and meaning. So what I find helpful, and when I work with clients that I have, or when I give talks, it's to think about for you, what has given you, what of the purpose, connection, engagement, purpose, and meaning did you get from work? And if you're not working, are you thinking consciously and intentionally of how to build that into your life? If you're not, I just recommend that you think about it. And maybe not at the very beginning, when you decide to stop working full time. You know, you you may just want to take some time off, and that's perfectly fine. There's no right and wrong way to deal with this retirement. It really is a more personal opportunity. But if you're in a couple, it can be more complicated because, you know, you may have different values, interests, priorities, ages, energy levels. That's a whole separate thing, which I'm going to talk a little bit about as we go ahead, of just the importance of having communication with whoever is in your life, whether it be a married partner, friend, adult children, whomever. It's just important to think about what you want and to understand what the person that you're maybe sharing some of the years with wants, to try to see if you can create a individual and also a shared vision, kind of like a financial portfolio. You know, it's got to be fluid, periodically reevaluate it, because life constantly changes. I mean, life can change in a millisecond. So it is helpful to think about what will get you out of bed in the morning. And it can be routines. It can be exercise. I mean, there's no right and wrong, but it is important to think about what will give you connection, engagement, and purpose and meaning. And what I find is if people give some thought and intentionality to that, there's a chance not to have to go down the slippery slope, which can easily happen. You know, there's kind of this dark side of not working or retirement where you get too isolated. And I think the pandemic, I mean, many people have said that the pandemic has given people sort of an opportunity to see what retirement might be like, because you're more home and maybe more isolated. So it's important, you know, to think about how not to have that happen for you. But again, there is no right way. There's a book that I love by Ken Dykewald that came out in July called What Retirees Want. And I recommend that book. He talks about the different segments of retirees and really pointing out we're not all the same. Some people, you know, really have worked hard and they don't want to work anymore, you know, and there may be enough other outside interests, hobbies, whatever, and there's not a need to earn money, and somebody could be perfectly happy. Others might be what are called contributors, you know, that they've worked, you know what your skills are, but you want to use them in a different way, and you maybe want to think about giving back. There are others that want to collaborate more. So they're different. There's no right way, as I said before. But the important thing is recognizing we have these bonus years to think about how you want to handle it. And with this new notion of retirement as a transition, it's helpful to recognize that all transitions have some commonalities. There's an end. There's generally a kind of a period of unknown, and then there's a period of new beginnings. And some people have more trouble with the ending, some with the middle, the kind of unknown, and some with the new beginning. Some have no trouble with any of it, some with all of it. What I think is helpful is if you can think, and maybe if you, whoever's important in your life, have them think too, how have you handled transitions in the past? Have you had more trouble with the end, with the unknown, with the new beginning? Because it will help inform you on how you're dealing with this stage of life. I know for myself, I often have more trouble with the endings of things. There's so many things I like to do, and it's hard to sometimes let go of some of those things. Although I've really discovered, you know, as we all do, that you have to let go of things in order to open up the space so that there's some other alternatives to do things. But it is helpful to kind of be kind to yourself and recognize that it is a period of a transition, and there can be sense of loss. Sometimes people sort of call feelings, if you're not working or not working in the same way, something called disenfranchised grief. It's not necessarily recognized. I mean, some people think, oh, you know, you're not working anymore. You don't have to, you know, kill yourself so much. You don't have to get up every morning. And people think, oh, you should just be delighted and happy. And so they can't quite understand it if in fact somebody feels adrift and sort of like, who am I? You know, who are you? What's it all about? Because we're so used to maybe being important, or our identity has come from work. So again, it's helpful to just think about what's important to you. And you may not want to totally retire. You may want to do what some people describe now as a phased retirement, which is seeing if you can, if possible, negotiate where you are. Industries differ on this, but to negotiate, and to see, is there a way you can work but maybe have more flexibility? Or there may be an interest in what it's called an Encore Career. I don't know if some of you have heard that term or not, but there's an organization that's San Francisco based called Encore.org. And it's got some wonderful stories, resources, examples of people who have used their skills in a different way, and often for the social good, because it's not unusual that people want to contribute or want to have a sense of giving back. I always think it's helpful, to really think for yourself, to spend a little time self-reflecting. It's called life review, where you let yourself think about it that made you feel proud about it. Who was with you? What was it? Was it the action? Was it the people? It's so helpful to think about, sort of, really what you're proud of in relation to yourself, and to think about, are there some interests that you had when you were growing up that there just never was time for, that all the responsibilities of life kind of got in the way? And might you be able to resurrect some of those? Or if there aren't any interests that you think you have, who are some of the people that you admire? What are some of the things that they do that maybe you've always sort of thought, oh, if I had time, I would love to try to learn this language, or to play the piano, or to try art, or to do some volunteering, or to work as a teacher rather than, in the managerial position I was in. Again, there is no right way, but to give yourself time to think about, how do you want to live your life? And I'm a believer that it's not being busy for the sake of busy. I don't think that cuts it. It's really the connection and the engagement and the purpose and meaning. It's really important, I think, to also think about, what are the areas of life that you need to think about? I like to use the frame of puzzle. I co-authored a book called The Couple's Retirement Puzzle, 10 must-have conversations for creating an amazing new life together. And the 10 conversations are based on clinical work, myself and my co-author, as well as focus groups. And the topics that came up over and over are finances, health and wellness, where to live, expectations, social life and community, spirituality, legacy, end of life issues. I think I said the sexuality part, and I know you just recently had a talk on that here. All of these are so important, and they, in any puzzle, if you think about it, all these pieces are different sizes and shape, and they influence each other. And unlike a jigsaw puzzle, they're not going to fit together perfectly. And there's some that have more influence than others. And so each of your stories are going to be unique. What's important is to recognize there are a few that really impact the others. So finances, I'm a believer that no matter how much or how little money you have, it's helpful to talk to a financial person, preferably somebody who's what's called holistic life planner or holistic financial planner. So it's not investments per se, it's not the number as much as thinking about money as a tool, and thinking about, what do you need in order to have the lifestyle options and choices that you want? For example, if you want to age in place and not move, you may need money to, make your house accessible, as some of your health needs change. If you want to move, you may need money for that. And, there are a lot of issues to think about in relationship to it. So I think money and I think health and wellness are two of the biggest puzzle pieces. The longer we live, no matter how well we take care of ourselves, there are physical issues and medical situations that we tend to have to take care of. I said before that, people can have wonderful vital years ahead, even with multiple chronic illnesses and even terminal illnesses. So much has to do with our mindset and our attitude. There's actually a study out of Yale by Becca Levy that talks about positive attitudes about aging actually give 7.5 years more of life. So how we think, what our mindset is, not internalizing all the ageism actually can impact our life, not just our death, but our life. In addition, research has said that by the time we're 65 years old, 30% is genetics, and that's not a small amount if we have genetic predispositions for things, but 70% are things we can have some control over. And by that I mean nutrition, exercising our body and brain, spirituality, meaningful relationships, a sense of accomplishment. All of these are things we can have some control over. We certainly can't control everything, but we can have some control over those things. And I think it's important. And it's important to recognize that as we get older, I think community is even more important. I happen to believe in the notion that it takes a village, with children. And I think it takes a village as we get older too. We need supports. And one of the things I like to say with the thinking about, life being a series of transitions is, generally, if you think about it, we've all probably been to a circus and you see the trapeze artists, who climb the ladder and they grab onto a bar, and then with a leap of faith, they let go, swing through the air, hopefully with a safety net underneath, although I know there've been a few occasions when that hasn't happened, and then they grab on to the next one. That's a little bit of kind of what this is like. Sometimes it's a leap of faith, as I said at the beginning, taking a risk for these bonus years and just saying, I need to try something. But the safety net might be the finances. It might be who's in your community, who can you turn to? And I think it's important to think about it whether you're in a relationship or you're alone. And many people may start off being in a relationship and then life happens. And women still tend to outlive men, although the gap seems to be getting a little bit smaller. And a lot of people are single by choice or life circumstances. There are also a lot of what are called solo agers, people who, and more women, I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head right now, but there are more and more women who have chosen not to get married. Some have chosen to have children on their own, some not. And there are people who age sometimes with children, without children. We have these changing demographics. We have, people married, we have people living together, we have heterosexual couples, we have same-sex couples, partnerships, single people, solo agers. Whatever our circumstances, it's helpful to think about what's our safety net, who can we count on, who can we turn to. And I know you had one of your talks on end of life issues. And I think, there are a lot of important issues in relation to that. If you're, aging alone or aging with, a partner or maybe siblings or adult children, a lot of important things to think about and conversations to have. So what is it that will give you kind of a sense of connection, engagement, and purpose and meaning? I think it's helpful to think about, as I mentioned, some of the work situations. Do you want to use the skills that you have, but maybe in a different way? Do you want to volunteer? Do you want to develop new hobbies? Do you need or want to earn money? Do you want sort of an encore in terms of giving back? One of the mantras of the Encore movement is purpose, meaning, and a paycheck. Doesn't always work that way, but there are some amazing volunteer opportunities. And again, I don't know, given what all of your situation is, but there's a program called SCORE, which is for retired. It's SCORE, and I think it's Newton, but I think they're sort of opportunities around the country in different chapters. If you have skills, accounting, managerial, whatever, you could volunteer and help a startup or help somebody younger than you. Or if you are decided that you want to work for yourself and maybe in your Encore you want to be an entrepreneur, you can get a mentor or a volunteer from SCORE. So there are so many different organizations like that. Actually, I have an interview series once a month, and today I interviewed Carrie Hannon, who's done a lot of work on finding work that you love after age 50. And one of her recent books is Working in Your Pajamas, and she's done a whole book on remote work, on being able to learn how to work. You might not necessarily wear your pajamas, but working from home, and how probably as things are beginning to open up now, there may be more remote learning and remote work. But so that's another book that I totally recommend. Another book, I love recommending books of people. So another book that I love around the concept of transitions is a book that came out, it was like last fall, by Bruce Feiler, Feiler. You might know him from some PBS specials that he's done on kind of walking the Bible and what makes happy families. But the recent book is called Life is in the Transitions, and Mastering Change at Any Age. And I love the book. Partly I love it because it resonates totally with what my approach is, which is the importance of our stories and thinking about, what stories we have that help us, what stories hinder us. We can't change events that we've experienced, but we can understand and change the meaning we put on them so that we can sort of deal with it and learn from it and maybe not have the same things happen, as we go forward. The other thing I love about his book is he talks about first of all, he talks about life being nonlinear, which I totally believe. It used to be more in earlier centuries, that you did everything by certain ages. Now we've discovered that by the time you're in your 60s, people are going back to school, people are getting married, or they're living with somebody. It's not linear. There's no reason why you can't kind of redefine yourself and maybe have a more fulfilling and satisfying life in some ways than you did before, or just as an offshoot of, enjoying things tremendously. Many people say that the 70s are actually the happiest decade of their life. And I think that we've seen in the pandemic that the hardest time has been for, younger people, who have young kids at home, with the homeschooling or the, remote learning. And that, actually, as we get older, there are less shoulds and oughts, less expectations on us. So we really have a chance to kind of create ourselves. Some people kind of liken, middle age now. And middle age, I should point out, many people think it's like now 55 to 75 because we're living so much longer. And people give it all kinds of names like middlescence, but they're parallels to being a teenager, to adolescence. It's like trying to figure out your identity. Who am I? Particularly if your identity was work. It's like, who am I without my CV? Who am I without work? Or, do I still, and some people choose to want to keep working. I'm in my mid 70s, my husband's in his 80s. He's a physician and he still does telemedicine, once a week. And it keeps him grounded. It gives him that connection, engagement, purpose, and meaning. I think about my work as sort of a portfolio career. As Vicki had said, I do some coaching, I do some teaching, I do therapy, I do speaking, I do writing, I have my monthly program that I have. So it's a little bit of this and that, and it certainly energizes me. So it's important to think about what makes you come alive. What is it that might really just help you have an appreciation for the skills you have, for the perspective that you have, for the wisdom that you have. This is the whole paradigm shift of feeling empowered, that it's not all downhill. And there's a lot that you can contribute, a way to be role models, lifelong learning. I mean, I think your library is offering a lot of that. There, universities have these lifelong learning programs. You can be a teacher, you can be a student. People often are going back to school. If you are interested, well, I wanted to also comment that 50 and older is the fastest growing segment of people becoming entrepreneurs. So that many people kind of reach the point of saying, I don't want to have a boss anymore. I want to have my own schedule. And there's a lot of good information. Carrie Hannon has a good book. I think it's called You're Never Too Old to Get Rich, about being an entrepreneur. And there are other people who've written books, but becoming an entrepreneur is a big thing. Sometimes people buy franchises. Some decide, I have no stories of people who have decided they wanted a B&B, or they wanted to get into wine, or, my recommendation, if you want to do something like that, is try to see if you can shadow some people who do it, kind of do a little test run. It's a helpful kind of thing to see, would you really like it? Sometimes volunteering in an area that you think you might want to do some work in is a way to kind of get yourself involved in something. And some studies have said that, if you haven't been doing volunteering and then you say you're going to do it, once you're not working at all or not working as much, sometimes you say it, but it's harder to do it and get motivated for it. So again, I don't know the ages of any of you or where you are in the transition period, but if you have some interest in wanting to do some volunteering, if there's some causes that are important to you, start thinking now of ways you can get involved. And then, it's easier to kind of morph more into it as you kind of move along in your life. So here are a few questions to think about in terms of kind of what might kind of get the juices flowing in you. What have you always wanted to do, but you haven't done? And there may be things, there may not be, but these are just some prompts to kind of think about. And I do encourage people to do journaling too. I think sometimes it can be very helpful to write things down because it contains it. And it's really, and if you date it, it really helps you to recognize kind of what you're thinking about and, the progression of your thoughts. What are your biggest goals and dreams? Did you have goals and dreams when you were younger? Some of us did, some of us didn't. Have any developed over time? What are they? It's not too late to craft it. I don't know if any of you have heard of a vision board. A vision board is when you can just like take a poster board and you can use like magazines and cut out, settings, that speak to you or quotes that speak to you, and begin to think about what is it, that's important to you. What are some of your values? What are some of the priorities? What might you want to do more of? I've seen many vision boards that suddenly have yoga on it, or some meditation, or sunshine, again, there's no right way. And it's important, to quiet the inner critic that I think we all have, and to just know that, this is your time to hopefully make it a life that you feel good about. If you had unlimited money, what would you want to do? What would you want to do by yourself? Or if you're in a relationship, what might you want to do with somebody else? This is a nice one to, if you are in a relationship or they're, it's a good friend, each of you think about it. And, sometimes brainstorming can lead to all kinds of interesting possibilities. What new things do you want to learn? Again, I mentioned my lifelong learning is so important. And you can be the teacher, you can be the student. I know I take courses sometimes at some of the universities through the OLLI Lifelong Learning Program. There's one I particularly liked. You know, the pandemic has sort of set some, I mean, everything's now online, but it will change. But we would watch films and then talk about it. And it's wonderful to be in a room with people with such wonderful life experiences and to talk about movies together. You know, and the particular retired psychologist who ran it had themes. So all of these, and these are things you can do with friends. You know, you can set up, you know, you all view a movie and then you decide you want to talk about it together. I mean, there's so many things that one can do. What do you most want to see or experience? Now, I know a lot of that's been put on the back burner right now with the pandemic, and people have to assess their risk tolerance, but people are beginning now to think about travel again. And it may take a while, but, you know, oftentimes that's an important part of, you know, what people want to do. Some people talk about bucket lists. I kind of like the concept of the curious list. What are you curious about? You know, what are the things you'd like to learn or like to do? What relationships, if any, do you want to repair? This is the opportunity to really think about, you know, what's broken, what's more dysfunctional. I remember one time I gave a talk with some financial advisors and was talking about this, and a lovely gentleman came up to me and said, you know, I am going to call my son. We have a broken relationship and I don't want to reach the end with regrets. I really want to see if I can start repairing that relationship. So my suggestion is, if you can ask yourself some of these questions and think about what's important to you, you don't have to wait until you retire. You don't have to wait till your deathbed. Start trying to do those things now, because we need to think about, how do we forgive ourselves? How do we forgive other people? What are we grateful for? What can we achieve? It's all important so that we can not just grow old, but grow more whole, which I like to think about. Where do you want to live? You know, I think this is often an important one. Some people, many people say they want to age in place. If so, how can you make that happen? You know, there is this village model now, which is wonderful, that it started in Beacon Hill. And it's now there's villages all over the country where people pay a fee. They live in their place and they pay a fee. And sometimes there's a paid administrator, sometimes it's volunteer, but there's vetting of services. So, you know, if people need help, you know, there's a list of services and there's often activities that you can become involved in. Some, like Beacon Hill Village, from what I gather, offer exercise programs and seminars and volunteer opportunities. So, you know, it's important to figure out kind of what's in your community or what you have access, you know, to. But, you know, the village model works. Intergenerational learning, becoming a mentor to somebody, and learning from younger people. I've seen such nice partnerships of younger people helping older people with technology. Or, you know, interviewing stories, thinking about, you know, writing your memoir, gathering pictures together. I mean, there are so many ways to feel connected, engaged, and kind of giving back. There's no one right way. How can you live your life with a greater sense of purpose and meaning? What speaks to you? You know, what makes your soul soar? What's important to you? These are kind of important questions and prompts that may help you decide where you want to put your time and energy. There's a question that I like that was from George Kinder, who was known as, he's sort of was one of the first financial life planners. And he has a series of questions, and I like the last one in particular, and I've modified it a little bit. He kind of liked the way I modified it. I mentioned it to him at one point when I had spoken with him. This is a powerful question. You may want to even write it down. You don't have to answer it right now. But if you went to the doctor well, there are two, I'll give you the two of the three questions. If you went to a doctor and he told you or she told you that you had 5 years to live and you would be probably healthy during that time, but you didn't know exactly when it would end, what would you want to do? What's important to you? But then the most profound question is, what if you went to the doctor and your doctor said you had only 24 to 48 hours to live? What would you regret not having said or done? I think this is the most profound and powerful question, to ask yourself. And again, we don't want to wait till the end. We don't know when that's going to be anyway. It's so important to ask yourself that question and then come back to now and say, what do I want to do? It was that question that brought that gentleman to me who said, I want to repair my relationship with my son. Another little exercise that I'd love to have people do is, I don't know if any of you have done what are called visualizations, but if you kind of do some breathing, close your eyes, and then just picture yourself. I don't really have time tonight to lead you through it, but sort of. But let yourself close your eyes, picture yourself walking on a long circuitous route. And you go through some forests, some trees, hills, valleys, and you get to a house. And you have to go up a few steps. So you climb the steps, you knock on the door, and you meet your future self, your 100-year-old self. And embrace your 100-year-old self and go inside and sit down and ask your 100-year-old self some questions and listen to the advice that your 100-year-old self gives you. It can be very informing. And then again, you walk down the stairs, you say goodbye, you can go back anytime, and confer with your older self. And you kind of go through the circuitous route and you're back to whatever age you are now. And you try to take that information. Many people tell me that what they're often told is, take risks, don't be so frightened, believe in yourself, think about your strengths, use your strengths. It could be, it may be forgive so-and-so. I don't know what your own story would be, but it's really, there's so many kind of helpful ways of letting yourself think about, how do I want to make the most of this part of my life? So I do think it's important. It's a gift that we have to have these years, and it's not without, its, issues. There are also some shifts that occur that I just want to mention too, because I want to sort of normalize some of these things that, as we get older, I don't really believe there's a crisis, a midlife crisis that one necessarily has to have, but I think that there are midlife shifts that happen. We can get kind of nudgy. I sort of said before, like, who am I? Who are you? Who are we? What's it all about? This sometimes is where the spirituality comes in, trying to make sense of it. Some people grew up with spirituality. For some, it's religion. For others, it's just something bigger than oneself. But what's it all about? Often as we get older, our notion of success has changed. And it's less about how others evaluate us and more from inside. I don't know that we're ever totally free of, how others view us, but I think it shifts so that our own standard of just knowing I've done the best I can. And again, the being able to forgive oneself and know we all make mistakes. And actually, there's another book that I love called The Art of Possibility by Sander and his ex-wife, but they're both coaches. And he actually is the director, I don't know if he still is, of the Boston Philharmonic. And he's also been an executive coach. And he says to his students when they make a mistake, good, that's great that you made a mistake, because now you can learn from it. So it's like to embrace that we all have strengths and limitations. We all have, virtues. Sometimes what could be a strength may become a limitation because of, how we use it. But there is this opportunity to embrace these bonus years, to really recognize and say, I want to grow, I want to learn, I want to evolve, I want to give back if you're so inclined to do that, and to know there are so many ways to be able to do it. I want to keep learning. I want to feel gratitude. I want to harvest my wisdom. There's an organization that I also like called Saging International. It's SAGE-ING International. And they focus on helping people create a new identity called becoming a conscious elder. And I like that concept because it's harvesting our wisdom. It's saying, after we've lived a certain number of years, if we allow ourselves, there's a perspective and wisdom that we have. It doesn't mean that we know it all, but there's a lot we can give and mentor and teach, but also being open to learning from other people. And there's also, for those people who are interested in wanting more of a community, there's a national, and I think it's even international, like Conscious Elder Network and Elders for Social Justice. And, there are many ways to combine and group, with other networks to feel like, you can honor whatever passion you have. And maybe it is about a cause. But to let yourself recognize it doesn't have to be by default, that you really have some choices to make to try to create and live as fully as you can, knowing that we can't control it all. And no matter how well we take care of ourselves, we are going to age. But mindset and attitude just is so important. And I think it's important to empower ourselves and not just sit with the sort of expired sign, on our forehead. Too many people, unfortunately, do that. But to embrace it and even think about, like when I say to people, I'm 75, I have 75 years of life experience. And I feel good about that. And I don't believe 70 is the new 50 or that 60 is the new 40. I think when people try to hold on to that, it's still holding on to saying the youth is better and old age isn't so good. I think 70 is the new 70 and 75 is the new 75. And, I think if all of us can embrace that and feel good about what we can do, but also recognize that, I can't exercise like I did when I was 50 or 60 even. I mean, things change. But there's a lot I can do and I still have a lot of energy. I'm still working. But I also know each person has to figure out their own puzzle. And I never did mention what the verb part was, but the issue is you've got these puzzle pieces and then you need to puzzle it out. You need to think about what's important to you, what's important to those in your life, and to have some really important conversations. The book I co-authored actually has the beginning part of it is sort of communication 101, because there were studies coming out saying people just weren't talking about these things. And some people said they were just too busy. Some didn't want to open Pandora's box. Some just didn't even know how to have the conversations. So we give some suggestions on how to have the conversations. And then, sort of what the puzzle pieces are. And each of you have different puzzle pieces in your life. But it's important to recognize it and important to think about it, and talk with those that you love. And I'm glad you had the conversation about end of life issues. I think those are so important. And it's actually an act of love to have those conversations so that survivors know, what your wishes are, what your passwords are, where things are. Because at a time of crisis, you don't need an extra crisis on top of it. And the other thing is that generally, the older we get, the longer we live, we either will be a caregiver or a care receiver. And so another task often is learning how to give help and ask for help. And sometimes that isn't the easiest thing to do, but to try to find ways to do that. So again, we can live however many years we have, as fully and vitally as possible. And to know it's not all downhill, it's a transition, and that there are ways of being resilient and recognizing one of the benefits of living so long is that we've had to kind of deal with a lot of situations along the way. That's the other concept that I like from Bruce Feiler's book. He talks about disruptors and life quakes. And I love that concept. Life quakes, sort of like earthquakes, but life quakes are these big things that happen, sometimes that we've participated in making them happen, and some that just happen to us. And it's then the coming out of that and knowing that it takes a while to transition out of these life quakes. And many of you may have had multiple life quakes in your life, and to then think about, what have you learned? We can't change what it was, but we can really impact the meaning we allow it to have on us so that we can make healthy choices. We can recognize and hear what our stories are that we tell ourselves, and we can really rewrite some of those stories. Again, we can't change the events, we can change the meaning we put on it, so we empower ourselves to learn from it and potentially become stronger from it. I mean, I could go on and on because this is my passion, but I think I want to sort of end now and leave some room for questions. Think about, but just to remember that the focus has been embracing your bonus years, a time to grow, learn, and evolve. And that it's your choice in how you do it.
Oh, thank you so much, Dory. Now is the time. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box or unmute and just let us know what your question is. I'll ask a question while people are thinking. Dory, a lot of taking on new things, trying new things, getting older is scary. How do you get past the fear?
Well, I think the first part is acknowledging it and knowing that it's scary. And it's often helpful to think about, how have you dealt with scary things in the past? Sort of what have been some of the coping mechanisms that you've had? Sometimes it's helpful to do a little set of questions too, like, okay, what's your worst case scenario? If so-and-so, if such and such happened, what would you do? And then if such and such happened, what would you do? And keep asking that question of yourself. And often it leads you to realize that, there's a tendency, it's kind of a cognitive negative thinking that, it's sometimes we can catastrophize, or we can, kind of think we're going to foresee into the future, and we make ourselves a victim, or we imagine the worst possible outcomes. But if you can let yourself kind of be conscious and intentional and try to confront it, and sometimes it's pushing yourself through it, or sometimes going around it, that usually there can be a sense of mastery. That question makes me think of, I love this little it's called A Poem in 5 Stanzas by somebody called Portnoy. And it's, I think it was written actually in terms of people with alcoholism or substance abuse problems, but I find it helpful everywhere. So just picture this, there's 5 stanzas. I go down my stairs, I walk a few steps, there's a pothole in my street, I fall in it. It is really deep. I go really deep in it, and it is so hard to get out of. But I do, and I go on my way. Stanza 2, I go out my door, I walk down the street, I fall into the same pothole. I knew it was there. I can't believe I did it. I fell in, it's still hard to get out. I got out of it. Day 3, I walk down the street, I look at the pothole, and I trip, and I still fall in it. And I get out. Day 4, I go down the steps, I walk down, I see the pothole, I walk around it. Stanza 5, I go out, down my steps, I start going down the street, and I decide, I'm going to take a different street. So let's think about the pothole as your fear. So it may be helpful to think about, what is it about? What is it that's making you feel scared? Is it a sense of shame? Is it a sense of embarrassment? Is it a sense of having to be the learner and not knowing, if you're used to being on top of things, and try to see if you can figure out what your pothole is, what it is that you're afraid of. And again, do some thinking about how you would handle it if the worst thing happened, and to begin to see that you can be in the driver's seat. You can't control it all, but there's certainly ways that you can learn how to kind of cope and deal with things so that you don't hide behind it.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Let's see, I don't see any in the chat right now. I think that everyone is thinking very hard about what you've said to them. And they're pondering. That's okay. We can make this recording available afterwards for anyone who wants to see it again. We're going to have it available on local cable shortly. I want to thank Dory very much for coming out, for signing on and speaking to us this evening. It was very interesting. I think it gave us all a lot to think about. Before everyone goes, I do have a very short 2-question poll. If you don't mind answering it, I'm going to go ahead and start that. Very simple. Thank you all very much for coming this evening, and please look for our next program in our grant on aging and mental health. It's Wednesday, June 23rd at 7 p.m. You can sign up the same way you did for this program. Be sure to check our website for all kinds of programs, or pick up a paper calendar next time you're in the library. Thank you so much, Dorian. It's been a real pleasure having you this evening.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here. And could I mention one thing so people would know?
Sure.
So I have this free monthly call that you're all invited to. It's open to professionals and the public. It's on the 4th Tuesday of every month at noon Eastern time. And once you sign up, always starts the week before. And once you sign up, even if you can't be there live, you'll get a recording after the call. And you can go to my website. The sign up is at www.revolutionizeretirement.com. And if you go to the website and see interviews, you can see some of the past people I've interviewed and the ones that are coming up.
Okay.
And so you're welcome to tell anybody else about it. It's been going on since May of 2012. There isn't anything in December because it's too close to the holidays, but all the other months, the fourth Tuesday of each month.
Okay, I've put that information in the chat for anyone who needs that. And if you need it again later, let me know, email me, and I'll be glad to get that information to you. Thank you, everyone. Please have a good night. Thank you. Okay. All right, I'm going to end the Zoom call. Thank you, Dorian.
Take care. Thanks
Goodbye.
a lot. Bye-bye.